If people understand this, they would know that the cancer is government, not the left, not the right, it's government. God, I sound like the people I sound very unstatus right now, don't I?
Well, I was kind of walking us towards that, but
I'm getting angry.
You got us exactly there. That is ultimately the problem. So look, we know that we've got a government problem. It's spending too much. It's trying to collect as much tax as it can, but typically the amount of tax that a government can take tends to get stuck between 34 and 36% of GDP.
Yeah,
you can push it above that for a very short time, and then it almost always then collapses down on the other side because behaviours change, incentives change, people move work offshore, they go to 4 days a week, they do all that kind of stuff. So we know we've got a problem. Let's talk about what solutions there might be. And I've come up here with 4 solutions.
This is a solution to prevent us going bankrupt.
No, this is to save the system effectively.
And when you say save the system, if we don't, what is the TLDR on the
messy financial collapse? I mean, it's bondholder revolt. The whole thing comes down.
Okay.
So saving the system is good. What are the 4 solutions? The 4 I come up with is 1, default on the national debt. 2, cut the spending. 3, tax the rich. 4, raise growth.
Or a mix?
Well, yep, possibly. Yeah, we'll come to that as well. The reason I picked those 4 is because those are the 4 that you hear all the time. Man in the pub, Economies on Twitter. They all essentially. I mean, every solution ultimately comes back down to these, with the exception of the first one, the default on debt. I don't hear anyone ever talk about defaulting on the debt
because that's what Brazil and Argentina and Cyprus does, not the United Kingdom.
Yeah, nobody is up for this. But here's the crazy thing. Okay,
I think default on debt comes at a time where there is literally no other option.
But it's crazier than that, because let's say that we default on the debt, we wipe it all out. We say, sorry, bondholders, you're not getting paid. Sucks to be you. It's just gone. Forget about it. Move on. Okay? Here's the crazy thing. Because of the deficit that we're still running, so that 120 that you talked about, you knock that out, you're still running a deficit, and you get back where we are here in 15 years.
Do we know what the difference is this year? The gap?
Yes, so it's 146 billion if you knock out the interest payments. So
it's 260 billion.
Yes, this year, yeah.
I want to know what the increase in spending was in 2021 because of COVID, and I want to know why that hasn't come back in 2022.
Well, it's thought the lockdowns cost us about 500 billion.
Okay. But are we seeing a spike that will come back down? Will it naturally...
there were certain items in there that won't be repeated. Well, they say they won't be repeated. I mean, was it like 37 billion was spent on track and trace, something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, and they're talking about 100 billion on energy.
Yeah. So there were
Subsidies.
new problems. There were new problems now. So yes, we're probably not going to do track and trace again, but there's a whole bunch of other things we are going to do. But that's the crazy thing. So even if you wiped out that debt, we would still be back at the same 2.3 trillion in debt in 15 years, just by letting the current deficit run.
So you have to get rid of it and you have to cut spend. You have to do the two.
Well, if you wanted to do it that way, yeah.
But is there also another risk if you did that? The pound value will collapse.
Oh yeah. So we're on line item 1 at the moment.
All right. Okay.
So all I'm saying is that even if you did it, it wouldn't solve your problem, because all you would do is kick the can down the road 15 years and then be back here. And that's assuming that government doesn't increase its spending, which it has shown a clear propensity to do. So you'd probably be back here before 15 years, right? So here's some more problems with this idea. You also wipe out basically the pension system, because pensions hold a lot of gilts. So all of those pensioners who thought they were going to be independent, suddenly they're not, because you've taken away their pensions, and all of the taxes that you thought you were going to get from them, you're now not going to get because they're going to be immiserated. And so that deficit is going to go up even more.
Can you stagger it? Can you prepare for a future where...
So what I'm going to do, what I'm doing in each of these scenarios is taking an extreme position.
Okay.
And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to demonstrate that even that extreme position does not solve the problem.
Okay.
But because it's an extreme position, it is politically unviable. So that's the way to think about this, okay? You do more than that. Because you've wiped out the sovereign debt layer, you've just wiped out the financial system. Because since 2008, we moved the problems from the banks to the sovereign, and then gave the banks a whole load of sovereign debt to be their collateral layer for everything that they do.
So you're going to need to explain that simpler terms.
Level 1, for everything the banks do and the financial system does, it all starts from sovereign debt. That's their basic collateral from which they then go off and they make other actions, other things that they do, other investments they make or other loans that they make.
Okay.
So if you knock out the base layer collateral, you sort of domino collapse the entire system.
Okay.
And the UK is not a closed loop. UK debt will be owned by many other foreign institutions, foreign governments, foreign banks. So it's not like you can just evaporate the UK from the system. If you did this, if you knocked out UK sovereign debt, you would cause a domino effect that took out the entire Western financial system. That's why, if you remember, back in 2008, we pushed so hard against Greece failing. We weren't actually desperately worried about the Greek banks failing and the Greek sovereign debt going.
The knock-on.
But it could have been sufficient to perhaps cause the Italian banks to start to fail. And that would then cause the Spanish and the French and the German, and before you know, the whole system is gone.
This is like the thing that keeps coming up about the US defending the euro.
Yes.
They won't let the euro collapse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you did a show with Lynn Alden where she took the entire monetary system at a really zoomed out level and said, well, basically, look, it's just a series of banks owing other banks money. And then the Bank for International Settlement, I think she said, basically just nets it all off and says, okay, well, at the end of each day, you need to move money to here and here and here. But it's the whole system. The whole system is leaning on each other. It's just a series of nodes pushing against each other. So if you take, and the thing in 2008 was what if the Greek node goes dark, and we were worried about the contagion collapse that could have. If you took out an economy the size of the UK, obviously the whole thing is just going to go. Domino effect would kick in. So not only does defaulting on the debt not solve our problem, it would cause a complete collapse of the financial system, which would cause a complete collapse of supply chains, global famine and death. Because what's the incentive for the farmer to deliver food to the wholesaler? Or the wholesaler to the shop? In fact, how is the wholesaler going to get a diesel delivery to doing it? The whole chain, because our entire system is a series of transactions, and the half of each of those transactions is money. Because if you knock out money, it all goes.
Yeah.
Now, maybe in 10 years' time, there will be some sort of permissionless money system, which is widely adopted. Everybody knows how to use. The user interface is great. All the custody issues have been solved. Everyone's comfortable with it. And at that point, you could let this system collapse and move on to this alternative system.
What kind of crazy system would that be?
I don't know. Somebody might come up with one.
One coin.
But we're probably not there yet at the moment.
All right, okay.
So this doesn't work, and you can see why nobody talks about this. So this isn't a great solution.
Okay.
Right, what about cut spending?
That's crazy talk, man.
Yeah. Okay, so, and here I've calculated what you need to do in order to get the, well, first of all, I'm wiping out the deficit, so I'm cutting spending by that much. And then I'm going to say, okay, let's repay the national debt over 20 years, which basically means you turn that debt interest payment of 120 billion, you flip it the other way, and it's now you do a repayment of that much as well.
So it's it's basically a $250 billion flip.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is what it means for those numbers that we looked at earlier, those departmental budget lines.
Okay.
It means taking 76 billion out of the NHS budget.
Okay. Is there a chart that shows NHS spending year by year? Danny, have a look. I want to see when they were last spending 135 billion a year. This would be interesting.
It will probably
136 billion. Go on, both guess.
I think it would be less far back than you think, because the growth becomes
2012?
2013, 14. They spent 100.
I kind of saw it anyway, so I've cheated.
Yeah.
And what was it last 2 years? They're two anomaly years.
201 and then 200 basically.
And then they're saying it's going to come back down.
Projected. But I mean, by 2024, 25, they're projecting 185. So it's...
And I wonder if the trajectory up is based on inflation.
Yeah, probably.
Or an aging
At least
population.
partially, yeah. Both probably. And I'm sure many more factors.
Okay, so you need to get it back to 2012 levels. Okay, fine.
Now, and bear in mind, I said earlier that the total budget, that includes a whole load of non-cash items. Mm-hmm. So the actual bit that they get to spend is 144. So if you're taking 76 billion out of it, you're effectively halving the amount of
Frontline,
money
yeah.
that the NHS has got to spend. Now, this is why I wanted to look at this from the UK perspective rather than the US perspective, because
we can contextualise it.
yeah, as three Brits, what do we think the possibility of a political party getting elected promising to halve the budget of the NHS?
0.
2 chances. None of fuck all.
Yes, exactly. So there has not been a major political party, that has felt safe going into election for the last 20 years without promising to increase the NHS by more than the rate of inflation.
Look, even when because the Conservatives are the ones who tend to push this most, and even when they said like
Not that hard.
yeah, but like because they've tested the waters, they're like maybe we'll just privatise this one little element over here,
We
and
just
people are like,
modify a bit.
yeah, like fuck you, keep your hands off our NHS. It's like that.
They get shut down hard.
It's like that gun debate with the NRA where the guy's like, maybe we'll ban the big guns. They're like, fuck you, don't touch our guns.
Yeah, you can't. So for any American listeners, it's basically our religion.
It's like banning guns in Texas.
Yeah, maybe even worse than that. I mean, but yeah, it is of that order of magnitude.
Yeah.
I mean, unironically, in this country, you will see church altars with an NHS banner draped over the top of them. It is. This ranks well above religion in this country, the NHS.
Yeah.
And if you're knocking out half of its budget, and this is not just the NHS, this is everything is on this list.
And it's funny, you're saying that at a time where we've got record wait times. We've got ambulances queuing outside of hospitals. I heard today about somebody who, like, most people are like, oh, if I go to the A&E, I'm going to be there 4 to 5 hours. And it sucks. Somebody was saying today they were there for 15 hours.
So there is no way that you could do it the way that you're doing it now on that sort of money.
Well, again, that's why it's a different show. I want to know where they're spending their fucking money. I got a feeling it's on middle management bullshit. But anyway,
Yeah, I mean, it will be some of that. It's very difficult to. So when I came out of the city and I had a period of doing a bit of consulting, I did do some consulting for local government, and I was a bit surprised actually, because being a right winger, I went in there expecting to find loads and loads of unnecessary waste and padding and all that kind of stuff. And actually, I was surprised I didn't find that. What I found was organisations which had basically been created because they thought they were going to go and do something, and they gave it loads of money, and then everything's been through 6 or 7 rounds of cuts since. So what you end up with is government trying to do a whole bunch of different things, failing badly at all of them because they've been through so many cut cycles, they're simply not effective. But nobody wants to let them go because it's the idea that it does a certain thing.
but I don't understand how a budget can go up 50% in 10 years and a worse service be provided.
Well,
If Sky TV charged me 50% more and gave a worse service, I would become. If you went to the local restaurant and it was a 50% increase in the price of the pizza and it was a shitter pizza, you were like, I'm not buying your fucking pizza.
yeah,
So,
and
like-
you do sometimes see restaurants like that, don't you? You just steer clear of them. But that, I suppose I can't give you the perfect answer on why it is like that. But yeah, it is a problem that
You've said it already, it's religion.
Yeah,
Okay.
all of us in Britain know that we can't do it. So we've got to this point where we're looking at the solution of cutting spending, and we're on line item 1, and we all agree that this is an absolute no-go. You are not getting anywhere near government if you do this. And then look at pensions. You basically, again, you're halving the spending of the pensions and welfare. There's no way that you could provide pensions and welfare in the way that we're doing them now. It would have to be something like boarding houses. If you feel you can't make ends meet, you ring up the government, the man comes out, he sells your house and all your possessions, he moves you into a boarding house, and you get soup 3 times a day.
Well, listen, I've got a film coming out that I keep talking about this, got to release it. I went down to Harlow, made a film about inflation, and we went to this place called Terminus House, and it's a fucking favela in the UK. That's basically what it is. It's a ghettoized. They've basically taken old office blocks that are not being used, turned them into apartments, and they've filled them full of like social housing.
Okay.
We are heading in that direction anyway.
Well, it is the only cost viable thing that we've got left at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, there are still, near me there are, new modern houses coming out and being used as social housing. So there is still some, well, you could call it a facet of the system, but the point is, if you want to go down the route of solving the deficit and the debt and repaying the national debt, then these are the sort of numbers. And look, 38 billion, so effectively half the usable budget of the education department.
Okay, none of this is tenable.
Yeah, this is complete and utter fantasy as a solution, because you would not get anywhere near government if you try to do any of this.
Yeah.
So we've done 2 solutions so far, and both of them are complete and utter fantasy. Taxing the rich. This is the one that Ponant left-wing economists on Twitter like to talk about tax the rich.
Yeah.
And again, you know my approach when I'm looking at all of these. I'm not going to mess around with a half-baked solution. I'm going to go all the way in there with something really radical, and we're going to find that doesn't actually solve the problem. That's the case here. So my no messing around solution with this one is that we are just going to take every single penny from the Times 250 rich list.
Okay.
So the top 250 richest people in this country, which I think includes Rishi Sunak, I think he's on there at 222.
Okay. Yeah, we can take his.
We're going to take the lot. We come back to the practicality as to whether we can actually do that or not. You know, are they all keeping their money? Is Roman Abramovich keeping all of his money in a UK bank account waiting for it to be seized? Probably not. But let's assume that you can actually do it. Well, that raises you 653 billion. Right. What can you do with 653 billion?
Pay off a quarter of the national debt.
Yeah. Or run the government for 7 months.
Okay, that's the top 250. But like, did you do other scales? Did you say take 50% of the top 2,000?
Yeah, it doesn't work either because the next 250, they don't have even a fraction of the wealth that the top 250 have.
Plus, they all leave the country anyway.
Yeah. And that assumes that you could actually get the hands on the money. The moment you even remotely propose something like this, all of that money would vanish out of everywhere.
And plus, it's not just cash in the bank; it's assets you'd force out. It's unfeasible.
Yeah, yeah, and more. You know, bear in mind that if you did this to the top 250, the next 700, the next 3,000 would instantly know that they're on the target list sooner or later. So, I mean, every person with money and influence and power in the country would turn against you.
Okay.
So any government or any party that looked like it might get elected who was proposing something like this, I mean, you would get Epstein so hard if it even looked like you might get through the doors of Parliament. I mean, you would be suicided into the sun before you got anywhere near this.
Okay, that's unfeasible.
Yeah. So option 3, completely unfeasible. Then we come to raise growth, which is the favourite option on the right. We just, do the growth thing. That will get us out of it. Problem with that, and I'm going to slightly twist Greg Foss's words when he talks about this, because he talks about this at a global level, but let's bring back a similar version to the UK. UK national debt is 100% of GDP. Our servicing costs at the moment are approaching 5%. So you're going to need growth of at least 5% just to stay ahead of the coupon. The typical growth range for British growth is about 1.5 to 3%. Right? And that was before the damage of lockdowns, all the businesses that were destroyed. That was before we sanctioned our biggest energy provider. It was before we really got heavily into the whole net zero thing. Now, if you're going to move from a high return on energy source to a low return on energy source, even if you feel that that's exactly the right thing that you need to do, even if you feel it's all for the best, it's going to have an effect on growth. You're not going to get the same sort of returns on that as you would. So 1.5 to 3% is probably optimistic. So you're not going to get that 5% growth. And in fact, you don't even want 5%. You want some multiple of that if you're going to grow your way out of this situation.
Liz Truss tried growth.
She did, and she lasted 50 days. Or maybe even less. How long did she last?
Was it just bad timing?
So I think that's interesting one.
Because it was a very conservative policy.
Yeah.
But like as soon as she announced, so the first thing when she announced the tax cut, I was like, I don't need a tax cut. Like I'm the last person who needs a tax cut. And I don't think that means we know trickle down economics is bullshit. Like everyone knows it's bullshit. Like it's just bollocks. But I didn't need the tax cut. And then she talked about all the kind of increase in spending. I was like, we can't afford this. That was what was in my head.
There's something about that whole period that didn't smell entirely right to me, I've got to say.
Okay.
Because look, we spent 500 billion on lockdown.
Yeah.
She came up with a proposal to basically get us out because we are in a mess, and she recognised that. And she said, okay, let's try and grow our way out of it. And she came up with this package of tax cuts and pro-growth reforms that cost in total about 40 billion, something like that. So just comparing the size of that to the cost of lockdown, or in fact any of these numbers that we've seen so far, 40 billion is high, but it's not. It's not
about the same as track and trace.
Yeah, it's not super crazy, is it? I mean, it's not completely out on a limb. And more than that, the only bit that the markets didn't know about because most of it was published in advance. The only bit they didn't know about was the bit that you're referring to, the top rate tax.
Yeah.
Basically taking the top rate of tax in this country down to the level that it was under the last Labour government. And that would have, and many economists will tell you that actually if you do a tax cut, it doesn't cost you money, you actually gain money because it re-onshores work and various other things and changes incentives and so on. But let's just say that it was a complete reduction in income. It cost about 2 billion, which is half what we're given to Ukraine. So is that...
Hold on, what, a tax cut for the wealthiest from, what was it, 45 to 40? Or was it 50?
It was a 5 pence tax cut at the top end.
And it was only worth 2 billion?
Yes.
I'd want to double check that. But anyway.
Yeah, well, those are the numbers I've seen. But yeah, we can double check them. I'm sure we can flash something up if we find something else with that. So it's that was the only bit that the markets didn't know about on the day of the mini budget. Right, and then what happened, of course, is that whole snafu with the bond yields.
Yeah.
There were bigger things happening at the time. So that whole time we were sort of experiencing the sort of dollar milkshake theory play out.
Yeah.
The dollar was getting stronger and stronger. Money was flowing into that and away from other central banks. Japan had been beaten up pretty hard the week before. I remember looking at that situation thinking something else is going to blow up. And I was actually thinking it's probably going to be the ECB. I thought it was going to be the ECB because of Italian debt, because Italians got a lot of debt.
Yeah.
And what kind of happened is Liz Truss kind of, at precisely the wrong moment, jumped onto the world stage and said, "Cooey, look at me." But even then, I'm a little bit suspicious. Remember how it played out at the time. Boris Johnson had to go because we had to get Rishi Sunak instead. And it was very clear.
Boris Johnson didn't have to go to Rishi Sunak. Boris Johnson had to go because he was deeply unpopular for a whole number of reasons.
Well, you say deeply unpopular. And I really didn't like him for what he did with lockdowns. But bear in mind, when we say he's really unpopular, that the poll numbers tell a very different story now to then.
Yeah, but there's a different pressure that comes in. Like the polling might say one thing. I think people would have him back now. The public would rather have him than what they've got. But I'm saying there becomes almost like this. It's like cancel culture. It becomes this pressure that built up.
Well, there was that really strong media push.
There's a strong media push. There was reactions from people stepping down. Refusing to. And look, you might say that was a whole conspiracy. I think the writing was on the wall for Boris for a long time. But by the by,
I'm not necessarily saying it's a conspiracy. I'm saying that clearly a view had been formed and was being pushed that he had to go.
Yeah.
And it was very clear, if you remember that period, that all of the big influencers wanted Rishi to come in.
Of course, yeah.
They basically wanted a coronation, and that was the thing they kept on pushing. Let's just have a coronation. Let's not even put it to the members. And then it did go to a contest, and the voters picked the wrong choice. They went for Liz Truss, and they were never happy with that. And
who are the powers that be that are unhappy with this? Are these backbenchers? Is this the 19?
Oh, I think it's on many levels. I mean, look, the truth is I don't know, but.
Okay.
I increasingly believe that the amount of real power that the average voter has in this country is utterly negligible. I think almost all key decisions are taken at a level probably even higher than government.
So what is the chain of events you're saying happened to remove Liz Truss?
I think she was a bit artless with that growth budget. I don't think the numbers were actually that big, as we talked about. The numbers were, 40 billion is a big number, but not that big compared to this.
Yeah.
2 billion on the day is the only thing they didn't know about. This is probably not an analogy I can use on this show, so prepare to edit me out. But it's not that it was too big. They just needed to slow down and lube up a bit, and it would have been fine. But those two were just a little bit hasty.
But you're alluding to almost like conspiracy to get rid of her.
I don't know. I don't know exactly what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the scale of the numbers themselves did not, to me, justify the level of the reaction that we got. I mean, what really happened is that enough people didn't show up to buy bonds on that particular day. And this was during a period where, because of the whole dollar strength, money was moving out of other central banks to the Fed anyway, because you could get better returns there. So there was a squeeze happening there anyway. A very small tax adjustment came through on the mini budget worth about $2 billion. And that apparently caused enough people to stay away from the next bond issuance to completely collapse the system. Not quite sold on that one.
Okay.
Maybe it would have happened anyway. Maybe some of these people who wanted to see Rishi come in anyway were all too happy to stay away that day if they were connected to institutions that could have bought on those levels. So I'm saying I don't know. It just, the whole thing doesn't seem right. When you look at the scale of the numbers, it just doesn't seem right that 2 billion unexpected could trigger that.
I hear you. I
Yeah.
want to know the detail of that, but that's fine.
Yeah, I'd love to know, and I'm just going to accept that I don't have to know.
Yeah.
The key point for this conversation is that we had a prime minister who attempted to go down the growth route,
It did work.
and the shortest serving prime minister. And the media narrative was absolutely intense. It was, this is a libertarian jihadist trying all sorts of completely crazy things like tax cuts.
Okay, so
This is insane.
so growth isn't going to work.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to raise growth.
So great. So we basically looked at our 4 options, and none of them are viable.
Okay.
So when you have these shows and you talk to people and you say the system cannot save it, well, they say the system cannot save itself, but there is no solution at this point. We've just walked through it. None of those options is going to be viable.